For generations now, we have seen those great figures on Mount Rushmore and look at them as the idealized American citizen, at least for most of us, most of the time. And we look at our modern presidents and try to see in them some of the same qualities that we saw historically that made this country great, that set it apart from others, that made it guided by higher principles, a unique set of democratic and a Republican form of government. And we saw in it, we try to see in it, that that's the way things are now. And most of us are pretty frustrated, I think, on all sides of the political spectrum as to why that's not the case now. There is a common misperception, and I think it flows from the fact that we as American citizens believe not only in our right to the inalienable rights that are set forth in the Bill of Rights and to our Republican form of government, to the right of us to be free citizens, to be unimpeded by our government, and to be protected by the rights that we have, as well as to go forward and expect that there is a basic inherent goodness in our culture and in our country as an institution. And that is a common misperception. And the problem with it is, as I see it, is that it is a common misperception because that is not what is happening. And it is not what has happened for at least 75 years, and perhaps much longer than that. It is certain that there have always been dark forces that wished us not to proceed on the basic democratic principles and the basic sense of freedoms and the equality of citizens that most of us believed was inalienable and inherent in our condition as citizens. Most of us believe that no one wishes us ill. Most of us believe that even if there are differences, even if those differences are pronounced, that there is no malevolence involved in the differences that we see. We see actors that disagree with us, that is, politicians and political entities, corporate entities, the major players. We see them sometimes as ill-advised, but it's not as malevolent, not as wishing us ill, not as plotting against us. And we see them at worst as misguided, as influenced by other parts of the society about which we do not agree. And so we think, well, gee, we just have to change the balance of how people perceive what is in our best interest and what is not quite in our best interest. But we do not see, for the most part, and I think one of the basic inherent problems with the way we are today is that most of society, probably not most of the people who will look at this video posting, but most of society sees things not as good and evil, but as simply two different perspectives. And of course, of late, we have had people who are characterized as alt-right and as radical liberals. We've had people that outwardly shout and demonstrate against each other, and even there has been politically related violence on both sides. But for the most part, those of us who are in the middle of the spectrum in some sense, and most of us see America as a place of the middle of the spectrum, see the problems as alternate perspectives of two different ideas of how to proceed. One is liberal, one is conservative, one is Republican, one is Democratic, one is progressive, and one is traditional. And we see these things as ongoing and inherent ideas that are two alternate views of the way things really are. The truth of the matter is that is not the case. And I don't think anything is more obvious than the fact that over at least since 1984 and beyond, interesting date, right? And perhaps as far back as 1980 and earlier, there is the obvious impetus of a sense of us as lesser citizens, of us not as a distinctive nationality, that is Americans from all perspectives and from all backgrounds, but as part of a greater pool, which is the world, and this basic concept of the New World Order. I know that many people see the so-called New World Order as a greater positive, as a way to get away from nationality, as a way to lessen the polarity of national views, as a way of seeing all of us in the world as citizens. But the problem with it is that not everybody sees us that way. Not everybody around the world sees us that way. And worse yet, the people who are at the baseline promoting the so-called New World Order are not using it to make us all better, to make us all one, to join us in a greater perspective. It is simply a ruse. It is a facade. It is a game. And it goes back to what I have pointed out, and that is Pandemopoly. The idea of a New World Order is not there for us to all improve as citizens, for Africa and South America and the majority of parts of Asia and poor all over the world to be brought up to our standards. No, that's not the idea at all. The idea is to take us all down, to make us all equal, all right, but to take us all down. And it is to make us all equal, but not to make them equal. And what we've seen corporately in these mega corporations, and there are huge trends involved, not only has to do with the greater and greater polarity between rich and poor, the dichotomy between the very, very well paid for what they do and the rest of the populace functioning at $10 an hour or the equivalent worldwide, which can be very much less than that. So what I see as the Mount Roguesmore, not Mount Rushmore, is the four most modern presidents we have and how that their presidencies have impacted us. And as you may see, and I hope you see, it has absolutely nothing to do with being Republican or Democrat, being liberal or conservative, being progressive or traditional or anything else. It has to do with how these men, they're all men, have figured out how to be puppets for, have been told to be puppets for, part of the Pandemopoly to gain traction and advantage for our betters, for our overseers, for the people, the few dozen people who would love to see the rest of the world, the 7.3 billion of us, all as equal, but not as equal in any positive sense, and not with any top side toward having life which is better, freer, more independent, more democratic, more opportunistic, or as even meritorious. So let's take a look at some of these guys. We've got George H.W. Bush, a person I would characterize as the father of the modern New World Order. George H.W. characterized as having the silver foot in his mouth. Maybe that was his dad. But coming from a Nazi collaborator, coming from Prescott Bush, coming from generations of people who did not wish us well and who were operating against our better interest, slinking through the bottom lines of it. And Prescott Bush made sure that George had his way. George's brother went into banking and did some of the same kind of collaboration and dark stuff that Prescott did. And George got to be on the political side of it. George, after he got out of the war, World War II, he was supposedly an oil man. But his Zapata oil was actually stationed off, not too far off in the Gulf off Cuba, and interestingly enough, served as a helpful staging station for the CIA. So why do we link George? Because he's denied being the CIA, right? Why do we link him with the Bay of Pigs? Well, we do because the boats that were supposedly used for the Bay of Pigs happen to have been named Barbara and Zapata. And you can cross those two names any way you want to, and you'll only come up with one name worldwide that links those two names together, and that's George H.W. But even darker, a few years later in 1963, is the Kennedy assassination. And George H.W., innocently enough, cannot remember where he was exactly when he heard the news that JFK had been assassinated. And he would have to be one of the two people older than about 8 years of age in the United States in 1963 who does not remember where he was. But interestingly enough, George made a phone call into federal government operatives to let them know and to leave a message that maybe there was a suspect and that he himself, H.W., was in location X or Y. I can't remember exactly, but it was to clear him. Now there's a picture of a guy who looks, well, let's call it exactly like George H.W. out in front of Dealey's Plaza at the site of the Kennedy assassination. And while there are a few people who still believe that Oswald did it alone and that the three-bullet theory works, most of the rest of us don't anymore. And the 150 people or so that died as witnesses around that circumstance in improbable and statistically impossible list of deaths, there's evidence everywhere. So with whom does he associate Kissinger? How is he linked? Well, he's linked to all of the major groups, and there are many who say perhaps he is linked with the assassination attempt of Reagan by Hinckley's, because Hinckley's just happened to be one of the close friends of the Bushes and a family that allegedly owed a considerable amount of money to the Bushes at the time of the assassination attempt. Isn't that interesting? So let's move on to Clinton, and one would think, well, gee, these two guys are not related at all, except that Clinton was groomed even before he came into office, was probably either a CIA operative or a CIA trainee. He ran for Congress while he was still in his 20s, and amazingly came up with a great amount of money. How did that work out for campaigning? He became a boy governor, and with the obvious follow-through that we see that not everything that went on in Arkansas, which is where he was governor for a number of years, was all on the top side. There were mysterious deaths and all kinds of things, links to bad actors. And if you watch the recent movie, American Made, you have to make some linkage, try to make some linkage between what happened with Barry Seal and what was really happening in Mena, Arkansas, which was related to the CIA, and think about the two guys who became president who might have been linked to the Mena, Arkansas cocaine and drug-related matters, which happened to be a CIA operative and at times CIA director, George H.W. Bush, and the Arkansas governor, William Jefferson Clinton. So we've got NAFTA, we've got Osama bin Laden, we've got the coal incident, we've got Bosnia-Herzegovina where hundreds of thousands of people died and Clinton did nothing. We got Rwanda where probably 800,000 people died, Clinton did nothing. and look at the associations Clinton has with the Dragon, with the Rothschilds, with his wife's linkage to Lynn Rothschild, and how that may have been playing out for the last 30 years. And then the list of mysterious deaths, which statistically are impossible to have happened accidentally. Ron Brown, James McDougall, Vince Foster, Jerry Parks, Kathy Ferguson, Barry Seal, the Clinton bodyguards, and others. How do all these people mysteriously die? And then we've got the Iraq sanctions and Madeleine Albright and the inconsequential disregard for 500,000 children under the age of 5 dying in Iraq before the second Gulf War, before the second Gulf War. Pay attention to it. And now we've got the big boy, the guy that turned the tables and made all this worse, even though these predecessors were working toward this same end, this new world order. You got George W. Bush, the ultimate puppet, a guy not smart enough to be president. Let's face it, one of the two stupidest presidents, only compared with Warren G. Harding for his stupidity, and combined with the obvious rash overstatements that he made right from the start. He amassed a huge campaign war chest even before he ran. Who wanted him to be president, I ask you? Who? So he had his major aides in tow, and those major aides are all part of the greater collective New World Order folks, including the Project for New American Century. The folks that said we needed to have a new Pearl Harbor in order to go after those rogue states that we need to disrupt. Beginning with Iraq, of course, but perhaps Afghanistan, North Korea, Iran, Libya, and others. So within 9 months of becoming president, 9/11 happens. And for any of you who believe that 9/11 happened and was caused by 19 rogue Arabs, unrelated to anybody, not sponsored by anybody, not used as puppets for anybody, and that the 9/11 attacks fit into any kind of rational pattern which follows the narrative of the George W. Bush regime, God help you. You need to look at my little questionnaire and the rest of the stuff that's here, and the vast information from a whole variety of sources that say that that's not the case. So in the heels of that are two other major crimes. You can call them three, but two other major crimes. One is the Afghan war, which is crazy. I mean, why do we go after a whole country because Osama bin Laden is a terrorist? Why do we call terrorism the new war when it's 20 or 30 or 50 or 5,000 actors? Why do we see it that way at all? Why do we go after Iraq when nothing relates from 9/11 to Iraq? Why do we call it yellow cake tubes that were there? Why do we drag in Tony Blair? Why do we bring the Brits and everybody else that we can along? Why do we claim weapons of mass destruction when none were found? Why do we treat Saddam Hussein as an enemy when he was an asset and a collaborator and the counterpoint to the Iran situation in the Middle East? Why do we claim he supports terrorism when he may well not have supported it at all? There were promises that the war was going to be over in 6 months. The evil, dark Wolfowitz, Pearl, Rumsfeld, Cheney, Condoleezza Rice, those folks made us promises, first of all, and Colin Powell, don't forget him. They told us all of this stuff was going on and that they would fix it within 6 months, and that the payment for most of the expense of it would occur as we collected the oil from Iraq and reversed the process. Well, here we are 16 years later. How much of it has been paid for by Iraq? How stable is Iraq? How beneficial is Iraq? How much have we benefited from having it there? How many millions of people have been destabilized? How many hundreds of thousands of people have died? and how has it resonated throughout the entire Middle East, in Syria, Libya, and elsewhere, and how have we done in Iraq, in Afghanistan. But the other piece of this that is dark and evil is George W. Bush and the Patriot Act, an act that was already pre-printed at the time 9/11 came and was enacted within days thereafter, destroying our own personal rights, breaking down our own personal freedoms, circumventing the Bill of Rights, and giving the United States government the opportunity not just to pick up a few random malcreants throughout the Middle East and drag them off to Gitmo, but to surveil and intrude upon and to destroy the privacy and our basic rights in the United States. And it sits there waiting, folks. It sits there waiting to destroy our rights in any number, at any time, in any fashion, by simply a flip of the switch. The Patriot Act is darkness compounded. So we have now spent trillions of dollars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Thousands of American citizens have died. Millions of American citizens, soldiers and private contractors, suffer from PTSD and perhaps much worse. Neither of those situations is any better than it was 6 months after little George, little Bushy, little shrub George W. Convinced most people to vote for this. And so it is dark and evil and awful. And finally, there's the fourth guy. And really, I don't need to talk about what he has done. He came in promising that, saying that he would not have voted for the Iraq War. That's how he got differentiation with Hillary. And then, as soon as he got in, he funded and refinanced and reallocated and expanded upon and went into other nations with the Iraq War and the Afghan War in tow. Did he do anything as a constitutional scholar, as an alleged lawyer? Did he do anything to reverse the Patriot Act? Well, no, of course not. And as we're beginning to see with the stuff that's gone on in the last couple years of his administration, there are all kinds of dark and evil things that have happened where he misused and misappropriated the work of the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, military confidence, and others. And that his actors in the Department of Justice, in the Secretary of State's office, in the Secretary of Treasury's office, were all part of the dark side of it. Now, there's one other piece I want to back up on, and this is a very important piece because it fits into the Pandemopoly, it fits into the bank crash, it fits in both George W. Bush and Obama's schemes, and that is the whole deal around the alleged crash and huge recession which occurred in 2008, which took all of the middle class equity away and which destroyed millions of jobs, disrupted people all over the world. And who did we benefit? Who did we see fit to help? The banks. And they were too big to fail, right? Hank Paulson told us they were too big to fail, and since Lehman Brothers had already crashed, we needed to jump in before the rest of them crashed, give them $700 billion, follow along through two regimes and give them trillions of dollars more. Let the Fed fund them, not audit anything, not follow on anything, not give them a mandate to do anything beneficial for us. And to the contrary, give the banks protection for failed bankruptcies and mortgage recoveries, make the folks, most of them, do short sales, and then give the bank the money that the short sale that resulted from the short sale, and cover the bank 100%, but don't cover the homeowner who lost his home. Don't cover or help the millions of homeowners next door to those failed mortgages who lost all of the value of the equity of their home. Don't help anybody out that was actually hurt and damaged by those banks. And in the process of giving the banks not the $700 billion but trillions of dollars, allow the bankers to consolidate, buy off other banks, privatize, and make themselves 3, 4, 5, 1,000 times less able to fail. So that when the next recession or depression occurs, when the switch gets turned off again, it will not simply be, gee, can these guys fail or not? It will be, they all failed. We pulled the big red switch and they all failed, and now you guys, problem, reaction, solution, have to fix it for us. So if you think that these guys are on one side or the other, if you still vaguely believe that the Republicans and Democrats have two separate agendas and that one is pitted against the other and that they're not all working against us, you need to go back and look and tie these all together, because in the essential elements, despite the fact that they're all playing little games and they try to pit one against the other and pit us against half of them, none of that has any meaning. What's really going on is Pandemopoly. What's really going on is that they're attempting to divide us in a way that allows them to keep moving, to shuffle forward, to push further onto their agenda, and to tie this all together in some great Pandemopoly while they gain greater control. And all four of these guys are legionnaires, they're juniors, they're puppets, they're not the main players. But if we don't recognize them as players, as dark, and as equally malevolent and engaged in the great game of Pandemopoly, to start wars, to have bank crashes, to do arms race, to engage in graft and vice, to play with taxes, and to do mega corporation buildups, to use false flags to create problem, reaction, solution, and to engage in voter fraud so that none of us has any say. If you don't think that that stuff's going on and they're not using it through the media, the mainstream media, and teaching us all fake crap, if you don't believe that that's true, then you need to go back and look at these four regimes and see them as Mount Roguesmore, because that's what they are. And when you do, unite the 10 million. When you do, let's recognize that we need to reverse this entire process, and it's not about us being separate. It's not about us disagreeing. It's about us all being on the same page, and that's unite the 10 million, and none of us being on the page of Pandemopoly, folks, because when we do, we're all going to end up as slaves to the system. Thank you very much for sticking around, and give this a thumbs up if you can. It helps the algorithm. It helps gain some exposure to the process and to our greater process. Sign on, share if you will, become a subscriber, hit the little bell. I have more to say. I hope you find some of it beneficial and helpful, but we must move forward and we must tear down Mount Roguesmore, because it is our darkest side. Thank you.